Book of Heaven Volume 3, by the servant of God Luisa Piccarreta, little daughter of the Divine Will. Page 37-43. January 22, 1900, Correspondence to Grace. After going through most bitter days of privation, my poor heart was struggling between the fear of having lost him and the hope that, who knows, I might see him again. Oh God, what a bloody war this poor heart of mine had to bear. The pain was so great that now it would become ice cold, now it would be squeezed as though under a press, and would drip blood. While I was in this state, I felt my sweet Jesus near me. He removed a veil from me which prevented me from seeing him, so finally I was able to see him. Immediately I said to him, "Ah, Lord, you don't love me anymore." And he, yes. What I recommend to you is correspondence to my grace, and in order to be faithful, you must be like the echo that resounds in an empty space. As soon as a voice is emitted, immediately, without the slightest hesitation, one can hear the echo booming after it. In the same way, as soon as you begin to receive my grace, without even waiting for me to finish giving it, begin immediately the echo of your correspondence. January 27, 1900, The Order of the Virtues in the Soul. I continue to be almost without my sweet Jesus. My life is leaving me because of the pain. I feel such tedium, boredom, tiredness of life. I kept saying in my interior, "Oh, how my exile has been prolonged. Oh, what happiness would be mine if I could loosen the bonds of this body so that my soul might take wing, freely, toward my highest good." A thought said to me, "And what if you go to hell?" And I, so as not to call the devil to fight me, immediately snapped out of it by saying, "Well then, even from hell I will send my sighs to my sweet Jesus, even from there do I want to love him." While I was amid these and other thoughts, the story would be too long if I wanted to repeat them all. Lovable Jesus made himself seen for just a little, but with a serious aspect, and he told me, "Your time has not yet come." Then, with an intellectual light he made me comprehend that everything must be orderly in the soul. The soul possesses many little apartments in which each virtue takes its place, even though it can be said that one single virtue contains all others within itself, and that the soul, by possessing only one of them, comes to be endowed with all the other virtues. However, in spite of this, they are all distinct among themselves, so much so, that each of them has its own place in the soul. And here is how all virtues have their origin in the mystery of the sacrosanct Trinity. While it is one, there are three distinct persons, and while they are three, they are one. I also understood that these apartments in the soul are either full of virtue or of the vice opposite to that virtue, and if there is neither virtue nor vice, they remain empty. It seemed to me that they are like a house which contains many rooms, all empty, or some rooms are full of snakes, some of mud, some are full of pieces of furniture full of dust, and some are dark. Ah Lord, you alone can put my poor soul in order. January 28, 1900, What mortification does. It still continues in the same way. This morning he transported me outside of myself. After a long time, I seemed to see Jesus with clarity, but I saw myself as so bad, that I did not dare to utter a single word. We looked at each other, but in silence. Through those mutual gazes I understood that my good Jesus was filled with bitternesses, but I did not dare to say, "Pour them into me." He himself drew near me and began to pour them, but unable to contain them, as I received them I threw them to the ground. He said to me, "What are you doing? You do not want to share in my bitternesses anymore? You no longer want to give me relief in my pains?" And I, "Lord, this is not my will. I myself don't know what has happened to me. I feel so full that I do not know where to contain them. Only a prodigy of yours can enlarge my interior so that I may receive your bitternesses. Then Jesus marked me with a large sign of the cross, and he poured them again. So it seemed I was able to contain them, and then he added, "My daughter, mortification is like fire which dries up all humors." In the same way, mortification dries up all the bad humors which are present in the soul, and it inundates her with a sanctifying humor, in such a way as to make the most beautiful virtues sprout. January 31, 1900, Grace and correspondence to it. After he came quite a few times, but always in silence, I felt a void and a pain, for I could not hear the most sweet voice of my sweet Jesus, and he, coming back, almost to content me, told me, "Grace is the life of the soul. Just as the soul gives life to the body, so does grace give life to the soul. However, in order to have life, it is not enough for the body to have the soul, it also needs food with which to nourish itself and grow to the proper stature. In the same way, it is not enough for the soul to have grace in order to have life, but food is needed to nourish her and raise her to the proper stature. And what is this food? It is her correspondence. So grace and correspondence to it form the links of the chain which lead her to heaven, and according to the measure in which the soul corresponds to grace, she keeps forming the links of this chain. Then he added, "What is the passport to enter into the kingdom of grace? It is humility. Through humility, by always looking at her nothingness and seeing that she is nothing but dust or wind, the soul will place all her trust in grace, so much so, as to make of it her master. And grace, taking dominion over all of the soul, leads her along the path of all virtues, and makes her reach the summit of perfection." What would a soul without grace be like? It seemed to me that she would be like the body without the soul, which becomes stinking and spews worms and rot from all parts, so much so, as to become an object of horror to the human sight itself. In the same way, without grace, the soul becomes so abominable as to be horrifying to the sight, not of men, but of God thrice holy. Ah, Lord, free me from such misfortune, and from the abominable monster of sin. February 4, 1900, Discouragement. As I was in a state full of discouragement, especially because of the privation of my highest good, this morning, making himself seen for just a little, he told me, discouragement is an infectious humor, which infects the most beautiful flowers and the most pleasant fruits, and penetrates down to the bottom of the root, in such a way that, by invading the whole tree, that infectious humor renders it withered and squalid. And if one does not remedy it by watering it with a contrary humor, since the bad humor has infiltrated deep into the root, it will make the root wither and the tree fall to the ground. So it happens to the soul who becomes soaked with this infectious humor of discouragement. In spite of all this, I still felt discouraged, all huddled within myself, and I saw myself as so bad that I did not dare to fling myself toward my sweet Jesus. My mind was occupied with the thought that it was useless for me to hope for his continuous visits as before, for his graces, for his charisms, everything was over for me. And he, almost scolding me, added, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Don't you know that lack of confidence renders the soul moribund? Thinking that she has to die, she no longer thinks of anything, neither of gaining anything, nor of making it circulate, nor of embellishing herself more, nor of remedying her sicknesses. She thinks of nothing else but that everything is over for her." Ah, Lord, I imagine seeing this specter of the lack of confidence, squalid, emaciated, fearful and all trembling, and all of his mastery, with no other ingenuity but fear alone, lead souls to the tomb. But what is more, this specter does not show himself as an enemy so that the soul may sneer at his fear, but he shows himself as a friend and infiltrates so sweetly into the soul, that if the soul is not attentive, seeing him as a faithful friend who agonizes with her and even dies together with her, she will hardly be able to free herself from his artificious mastery. February 5, 1900, The Circle of Truth of the Knowledge of Self. Continuing in the same state, with a little bit more courage, though I was not perfectly free, my dearest Jesus, on coming, told me, my daughter, sometimes the soul feels an encounter in some virtue, and plucking up her strength, the soul overcomes that encounter, and then, that virtue becomes more resplendent and rooted in the soul. However, the soul must be very attentive in order to avoid that she herself might provide the little rope to let herself be bound by lack of confidence, and she will do this by always restricting herself within the circle of truth, without ever leaving it, which is the knowledge of her nothingness. February 12, 1900, Voluntary defects form clouds. As I was in a state of abandonment on the part of my adorable Jesus, I felt my poor heart crushed by the pain, as though under a press. Oh God, what an unutterable pain! While I was in this state, I saw my dear good almost like a shadow, but not clearly. I only saw one hand clearly, which seemed to carry a lamp which was lit. He dipped his finger in the lamp and anointed the area of my heart, embittered to the summit by the pain of his privation. At that moment I heard a voice saying, "The truth is light," which the word brought upon earth. Just as the sun illuminates, vivifies and fecundates the earth, so does the light of truth give life and light, and it renders souls fecund with virtues. Even though many clouds obfuscate this light of truth, which are the iniquities of men, in spite of this, it does not cease to send forth glimmers of vivifying light from behind the clouds, so as to warm souls. And if these clouds are clouds of imperfection and of involuntary defects, this light, piercing them with its heat, makes them vanish and it penetrates freely into the soul. I understood that the soul must be attentive not to fall even into a shade of voluntary defects, which are those dangerous clouds that prevent the entrance of divine light. February 13, 1900, Mortification is like lime. This morning, after receiving communion, I saw my adorable Jesus, but completely changed in his appearance. He seemed to be serious, all distant, in the act of reproaching me. What a tormenting change! Instead of being relieved, I felt my poor heart more oppressed, more pierced, before such an unusual presence of Jesus. Yet, I felt all the need for a relief from the pains of his privations suffered in the past days, which were such that I seemed to be alive, but agonizing and in a continuous state of violence. But blessed Jesus, wanting to reproach me because I was looking for relief in his presence, while I was to look for nothing but suffering, told me, just as lime has the virtue of cooking the objects which are thrown into it, so does mortification have the virtue of cooking all the imperfections and defects which are present in the soul. And it reaches the point of spiritualizing also the body, surrounding it like a circle, and sealing all virtues within it. Until mortification has cooked you well, both the soul and the body, to the point of undoing it, I will not be able to seal in you, perfectly, the mark of my crucifixion. After this, someone, I can't really tell who he was, but he seemed to be an angel, pierced my hands and feet through, and Jesus, with a lance which came out from his heart, pierced mine, to my extreme pain. Then he disappeared, leaving me more afflicted than before. Oh, how well I understood the necessity of mortification, my inseparable friend, and how there was not even a shadow of friendship in me with mortification. Ah, Lord, bind me yourself, with indissoluble friendship, to this good friend, because on my own I can only show myself all coarseness. And she, not seeing herself being welcomed nicely, uses all regards with me, and keeps sparing me, fearing that I may come to the point of turning my back on her completely. So, she never accomplishes with me her beautiful and majestic crafting, because as long as we remain a little distant, her prodigious hands cannot reach me, in order to be able to work me and present me to you as a work worthy of her most holy hands.